Hello and welcome to Firearm Freedom. This is going to be another upgrades video. In today's upgrades video, we are taking a look once again at the Palmetto State Armory 104 rifle. And quickly guys, as always, before we get this video started, this is not a sponsored video, so there are ways that you can support me down in the description. One of those ways is to buy some awesome Firearm Freedom merchandise. You guys are going to be seeing throughout this video and back roll an awesome AK shirt that I have on my merch store. So if you guys want to get in on that, again, all that support really helps me out. Of course, you can comment down below, like this video. That interaction helps defeat the YouTube algorithms that are constantly pushing down gun content here on the platform. This is a little bit more of a rapid amount of videos on the 104 compared to what I normally do. Normally it takes me a little bit of time to get some upgrades going, but I did have a little tiny bit of extra 7.62 by 39 laying around in order to get this upgrades video out with a little bit more speed than I normally do. I also really enjoy shooting this 104, so it was kind of easy for me to do the upgrades because I just wanted to shoot it a little bit more at the range and see how it would continue to perform. Now, as I mentioned in the first impressions video, this is a rifle that Palmetto State Armory sent to me on their T&E program to check out. So I did not pay for this rifle yet. We can test it and basically destroy it if we want to. We just want to see exactly how it's performing, and that's why I love PSA. They just want to know how this stuff is performing overall. I will probably end up buying this one because I really do enjoy it and I just can't let it go at this point. I did do some upgrades. I know what many of you are thinking, Joe, these are the exact same upgrades that you do on every one of your AKs. And yes, you are correct. However, in a Riley 74 video that you guys are going to be seeing relatively soon, I switch up the upgrades, and spoiler alert, I hate it. So that is why I stick to the upgrades that I have here on the 104. They just work for me, and especially when it comes to AKs, it's kind of the same across the board. If one platform works with these upgrades, a lot of the other platforms are going to work. But before we get into these upgrades, let's talk about how the rifle is performing at the range. First of all, reliability is still 100%. Absolutely no issues at all. As far as internal wear, we are now sitting around 700 rounds, and I am not seeing any increased wear on any of the parts that I was concerned with, which is great. There is still no internal wear on the shelf and the right-hand side of the front trunnion. There is no abnormal continued wear that I'm seeing on the tail of the bolt carrier group. It is starting to now round over, and all of that is kind of taking care of itself, work hardening. I still am going to have a little burr on the back of that tail removed, just so that way it does not get caught up in the fire control group or anything like that. But for the most part, it seems that any of that deformation that was going on in the back of the bolt carrier group has now kind of stopped and work hardened, which is what I kind of assumed was going to happen. But nonetheless, it's something to always be concerned with a US-made AK, and for that matter, any AK that's not necessarily made properly. Those are parts to keep an eye on. As far as just overall shootability of the gun, I am still absolutely loving it. Recoil is what you would expect out of a 7.62 by 39 and a 12-inch barrel. It is not rough in the recoil department, but it's also not easy to get rounds on target. You're definitely going to know you're shooting a 12-inch 7.62 by 39. It just has that AK recoil about it, but it's definitely not a recoil that's unmanageable. It just takes a little bit to get used to, and once you do, you can start getting rounds out of this guy relatively quick. I love the 7.62 by 39 cartridge out of a 12-inch barrel like this because you're really not taking a hit at all ballistically downrange in how that cartridge is performing with this shorter barrel, which is what I really love. That's why I think the 7.62 by 39 in a short platform like this is a little bit of a superior caliber to something like a 5.56. Now, when it comes to the trigger, I still might be switching this out in the future, but this has definitely gotten a little bit better. So you got a little bit of mushy take up, but not too terrible. You hit a bit of a wall right about there, and then your brake. And when it comes to the reset, it's getting better. Not quite as squishy as it was before, but it is definitely still not the best trigger in the world. It's not that it's heavy. That's a big benefit here. It's nothing like an Arsenal factory trigger, as I mentioned in the first impressions video, but it does feel pretty lightweight. There's just a little bit of a weird sponginess to the reset that is working its way out. So I am pretty excited about that. Now, getting into the upgrades that I made to it, of course, we went with a US palm grip. Now, this one is a little bit special. This US palm grip is actually a plum coloring. Now, to my understanding, the only place that you can find the plum US palm grip is at Gun Mag Warehouse. Not affiliated with Gun Mag Warehouse, paid, you know, full retail for this to get it in on the review, and I do think it matches the PSA plum furniture perfectly. No issues at all there. It looks super cool. Of course, I am still rocking some Goon tape. These guys are awesome. Just a really cool company to represent on your gun. They just have some kind of cool marketing and all that good stuff. So I like the folks over at Goon Tape. The only affiliation is they sent me some tape to check out, but I actually really enjoy, it's basically just hockey tape, but I really enjoy having this on the pistol grip. Of course, it adds kind of that cool aesthetic to it, but aside from that, it really is very practical. When I am running the gun at the range, my hand just really sticks to it, especially on the hotter days, sweating, whatever. I have no issues still holding on to that pistol grip, and there's no permanent changes made to the gun. I can just rip the tape off, retape it, whatever, and it's good to go. So I am running the Goon tape on this. Works great, no problems at all there. Now, as far as the other upgrades, I have a primary arms micro dot up here on the Ultimac rail, which we'll talk about in a bit. Now, these primary arms micro dots have been phenomenal on these Ultimac rails. I know a lot of people worry about the Ultimacs cooking their red dots or ruining the longevity of the red dot over time. I have never ever had an issue with these primary arms. Super cheap. They're like $120 red dots. These things still last forever, take a huge beating, and they got a nice crisp 2 MOA dot. So again, I paid for this, and I have no issues, no complaints at all. I've bought quite a few of these now at this point, and I've never had a problem with them so far. And that includes dropping the optic right on top of it in a bag at the range, throwing the rifle down. It just, you know, it is what it is, especially with my AKs. I'm not quite as nice to them at the range, and they just take it very well, and I haven't had any issues with this optic. Like all my other AKs, I'm running a Daniel Defense 1-inch offset light mount. Really like this light mount, and I'm running a Streamlight Polytac. This is a great light. These lights come with a rechargeable battery in there, and they are polymer, so it really does a good job at cutting down the weight up here towards the front of the gun. It's another concern with going with a railed gas tube like this is just simply how much weight you have going on in the front of the gun. You can really easily get to it without touching the Ultimac if it is getting that hot, and I haven't had any issues of this Daniel Defense mount cooking the light or anything like that. These mounts are a little bit quirky at times, the Daniel Defense mounts. I think ultimately they need to have a different way of actually tightening onto the pick rail. I know a lot of people were frustrated that these were coming loose no matter how hard they tighten that screw down. Now, I've only ran into this situation one time where it felt like it was tight to the point where I was about to strip the screw and it still had a little bit of wobble. I don't know if that comes down to the specific pick rail that you're putting it on and, you know, how that might differ spec to spec, but in this case I didn't have those issues, so I just torqued it down really tight. It still has not come loose or anything like that, so no problems there. Of course, I am also running a Vickers Blue Force Gear Sling. I am very love-hate with these AK attachments up here. I tend to prefer an HK style hook for these slings. That's just my preferred preference. Sometimes this wire gets very annoying and I don't like how it pulls the sling back towards my hand. I feel like it kind of gets in the way. I want it to dangle down. But there are times that I really like it. And it is a very quiet setup to have. It's not making a lot of noise. So there are pluses and minuses to that cable attachment up there in the front. This is a really cool AK colored sling. So you have a very Bulgarian style cotton OD web to it. And then you also also have these really cool plum keepers and buckles here on the sling that I think just make it perfect, mixed with this tan piece here that is your quick adjust, and it just, the sling looks phenomenal on pretty much any AK that you put it on. Now, most places that you're going to find these Blue Force Gear slings, you just want to make sure that you're getting the AK specific sling. If you go with just a standard OD green sling, it is not going to have the same accents that their AK sling would. And I think that's kind of cool, something that Blue Force Gear does to still really just give you that awesome AK style, which I think is just great on this setup. Now, as far as just overall performance of the sling, of course it works just fine. Slings on AKs are much different, in my opinion, than slings on ARs. Whenever I'm running a sling on an AK, almost always the sling is just either hanging down or tied to the gun. I am rarely ever running the sling around my body like I would on an AR. There's just so many large, gross movements going on when you are looking at reloading the AK, transitioning with the AK, or whatever else, that sometimes make having a sling almost more of a problem than not having a sling. And that's in a lot of the com block doctrine as well that you guys will see around the world. But there are definitely a lot of times where I'll just throw the sling over the back of my neck, so that's the only thing it's hanging on, and I just use it for admin purposes at the range. So regardless, having a sling is nice. Aside from the attachment up in the front of the gun, I am using the standard attachment that's here in the rear of the stock on this PSA 104. Now, the stock is holding up really well. If you guys remember from the first impressions video, we did a little duct tape trick here in the back because it was a little bit wobbly. That is still holding up incredibly well. No issues at all there with the tape. And once the stock is in the folded position, of course, it is still very rigid. It's not quite as rigid as some other plastic stocks that I have in my collection, but it is still pretty good for a US-made 4.5 mil style side folding stock. I think there is a little bit of work that probably could be done with this stock, just making it a little bit better moving forward. It just has kind of the more cheap feel to it right now, but again, it's not bad. It's kind of a tough comparison between com block style plastic stocks. There's just something about them that's a little bit different, but this is still holding up incredibly well, taking the recoil no problem, and all of that good stuff. As far as the lower handguard, as I normally do with these upgrades, I keep that with this stock handguard, especially if it has a heat shield. Of course, if it does not have a heat shield, it's going out immediately, but this heat shield is holding up very well. It's summer here in Pennsylvania, and it is getting hot at the range, and these rifles are getting hot at the range. So having a good heat shield, especially in a plastic handguard, I've had other plastic handguards with no heat shield start to melt. These have been holding up incredibly well. Contrary to how I think they did with the stock, this lower handguard, and really the handguard set as a whole, they did an incredible job with. It is identical to my other com block handguards with heat shields, and it feels incredible, exactly like all those other ones. And not only do I really prefer the look of this lower handguard, I think it looks great and it does the part, but I also think that just ergonomically, it is a really nice handguard. You have this really nice venting here that I would imagine is supposed to also help with heat, but it also acts as a little bit of traction aid for your hand, and then you got a little bit of a palm swell here. Now, as far as the Ultimac rail, the nice thing about these 12.5 104 style AKs is that all of this up here is standard AKM. So this is a standard M1B Ultimac rail. Drops right on there, no problems at all. And that's another draw that really brought me to the 104 style AK, is that there's nothing proprietary. There's nothing specific up here. I don't have to go searching for a different type of rail. I don't have to worry about lower handguards not fitting. Any standard AKM furniture is going to drop right in. The Ultimac M1B, great setup. I've never had an issue of this losing zero. I've seen a lot of videos more recently of people talking about this losing zero and being horrible. I don't know what type of drugs people are smoking, but again, I've never had an issue with this losing zero, and none of my AK buddies have ever had an issue with their Ultimax losing zero or having issues. This still reigns supreme for me as an optic mounting solution because it gets low enough for me to co-witness with my sights, which I absolutely love. I still believe the M1B is probably the lowest mounting solution for AKs on the market in order to get that micro dot as low as humanly possible to still co-witness with the sights, which is super handy to have, especially if the battery dies or whatever. Now, when it comes to the safety, I kept that exactly how PSA had it from the factory with this extended little notch here. The safety's awesome. I've had no issues at all. It has stayed tight the way that it should. A perfect amount of tightness so that it's not too tight, but it's also not too easy where it's flying off the gun down into fire when I don't want it to, or flying up to safe when I don't want it to. This really aids in the speed of shooting this rifle, and it does a great job. Now, of course, you guys heard me mention in the beginning, this is a rifle. If you didn't catch that in the first impressions video, this muzzle device is pinned into place. So a lot of you were asking on Reddit and other things where you could purchase this muzzle device. I don't know that this can actually be purchased anywhere. I think this is just what PSA throws on their 104. They might allow this as a separate purchase later in the future. This is actually not doing a terrible job. It looks a little bit funky with the crown, but back here it's just fine. And recoil reduction is doing a pretty good job. The only thing I don't like about this brake is that tuning fork effect. You can really hear that. Not with shooting quite as much, obviously, because of just the noise of the shot, the flame going out in the front. It's covering quite a bit of that noise. But when it comes to reloading the gun and racking the charging handle, you just really hear that tuning fork, and it can get a little bit annoying at the range. So that's the only thing. If PSA makes a change to this pinned muzzle device in the future to get it to 16 inches, I would say make this just a little bit less of a tuning fork design, and you'll have an ultimate winner here on your hands. Overall, guys, that is going to wrap up this upgrades video on the 104. I hope to get this back to the range relatively soon, but we are now starting to see a little bit of that 7.62x39 surplus that's here in the country begin to dwindle down just a tiny bit when it comes to steel case ammo. Now, of course, I have a very large surplus myself, but with that being said, I really don't want to dig into that because God only knows what the future of com block calibers is going to look like. So again, I hope to get this back to the range relatively soon. When I do, you guys will be seeing videos on the full review of this rifle and how it is holding up over time. If you guys have any other questions about this rifle or anything else on the channel, please throw them down below in the comment section and I absolutely will get back to you. While you're down there, check out the links in the description, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and stay tuned for more great videos to come soon.